My name is Michael Turner. I'm 46 years old, and for nearly 2 decades, I dedicated my life to one company. I poured in late nights, missed weekends, and gave them everything I had. But the way they repaid me wasn't just insulting, it was catastrophic. It happened in a boardroom on a Tuesday morning. I'd been called in for what I thought was a strategy session on the government contract I'd spent months negotiating. $33 million on the line. I walked in with my notes, my reports, ready to do what I'd always done. Lead. But the moment I sat down, I knew something was wrong. The room was quiet, almost too quiet. My boss, a man I'd stood beside for years, wouldn't meet my eyes. Instead, he shuffled his papers, cleared his throat, and said the words that knocked the wind out of me. Michael, the board has decided we're moving in a new direction. We'll be transitioning your responsibilities to a team of interns. At first, I thought I'd misheard him. Interns? The kind of kids who were still figuring out where the coffee machine was. I'd built this contract line by line, ensuring every compliance box was checked, every regulation followed. And he wanted to hand it off to people who hadn't even graduated college? I sat there in silence, trying to steady my voice. You're replacing me with interns? He didn't look up. They're cheaper. Fresh perspectives. You know how it is cheaper. That was the word that echoed in my head. After all the years, all the nights I spent at that office instead of home with my family, it came down to saving a few salaries. I didn't explode. I didn't beg. I didn't remind him that my work was the only reason the company even qualified for that $33 million government deal. Instead, I nodded slowly, closed my notebook, and said, "Understood." But inside, something snapped. As I walked out of that boardroom, I wasn't just a man who'd lost his job. I was a man holding the blueprint of their downfall in my hands. Because I knew the truth. That contract wasn't secured by luck or charm or flashy presentations. It was secured by experience, mine. By meticulous planning, compliance knowledge, and relationships I'd built over years. Without me, that contract wasn't just vulnerable. It was doomed. I walked down the hall, every step echoing in my ears, and for the first time in my career, I felt no loyalty to the company whose logo hung on the wall. They had replaced me with interns to save pennies. They had underestimated me, dismissed me, erased me. But what they didn't realize was that I carried the key to a $33 million disaster. And I wasn't going to lift a finger to stop it. Before that Tuesday morning, before the humiliation of being told my career was replaceable by interns, I believed I had built a secure, meaningful life. I thought loyalty meant something. I thought decades of dedication still carried weight in a world obsessed with shortcuts. I grew up in Ohio, the son of a factory worker and a school secretary. My father used to say, "You don't leave a job half done. If your name's on it, it should mean something." That stuck with me. Every task, every project, every contract I touched had my name tied to it, and I made sure it stood for quality. When I joined the company in my mid-20s, I wasn't the sharpest or the fastest, but I was steady. I showed up early, stayed late, and learned everything I could about government compliance, procurement rules, and contract management. It wasn't glamorous work. It was endless forms, background checks, security protocols, but I thrived on it. Because I knew those little details made the difference between winning a contract and losing one. Over the years, I became the guy people came to with questions no one else could answer. "Michael, does this form need a signature on page 12 or page 14? Michael, what's the deadline for this security clearance renewal? My phone buzzed at all hours, and I answered every time because I believed in being reliable, and it paid off. I climbed the ladder slowly, rung by rung, from assistant contract manager to senior compliance officer, and finally, project lead on government bids worth tens of millions. I built a reputation not for being flashy, but for being exact. People in Washington knew me by name. If I signed off on a contract, they trusted it was bulletproof. That reputation didn't come easy. I missed birthdays. I missed soccer games. I remember one summer when Lily, my daughter, begged me to take her camping. I promised I would as soon as this bid wraps up. That bid stretched another 6 weeks, and by the time I finally had a free weekend, the season had turned cold. I still remember the look of disappointment on her face, but I told myself it was worth it, that I was sacrificing in the short term to secure something permanent, stability, a career that would take care of my family. I thought the company saw that sacrifice too, and for a while, they did. My bosses praised me, coworkers respected me, clients trusted me. I even trained half the managers who later tried to undermine me. I was proud of what I built. I thought I'd retire there, my name etched into the history of the contracts we'd won. Then came the $33 million deal. It was the biggest contract in the company's history. A government partnership that could keep our doors open for years. The kind of deal that companies brag about in press releases, that shareholders toast with champagne. And I was the architect. I spent months preparing for it. Late nights buried in regulations, weekends cross-checking compliance requirements, long calls with government officials to ensure we met every standard. My wife used to joke that I cared more about Section 14B of the Federal Acquisition Regulations than I did about my own health. Maybe she wasn't wrong. When we won the CE bid, the office celebrated. Balloons, champagne, pats on the back. My boss gave a speech thanking our hardworking team, but I knew, and everyone else knew, that without me, that contract never would have seen daylight. That's why, even with the subtle warning signs, I didn't think I had to worry. Sure, the company had started hiring waves of interns. Sure, my boss had made comments about fresh energy and young blood. Sure, they asked me to simplify processes that couldn't be simplified without risk. But I brushed it off. I thought I was untouchable because the contract was untouchable. I thought wrong. Looking back, I can see the cracks. The way my boss's compliments grew shorter. The way the board seemed less interested in my presentations and more interested in cost-saving charts. The way interns were suddenly shadowing me, not just to learn, but to copy. Still, I believed loyalty mattered. I believed that after all the nights I gave up with my family, after all the weekends I spent in the office instead of in my backyard, I had earned more than just a salary. I had earned trust. That was the life I thought I had. A career built on dedication. A company that valued my sacrifice. A boss who recognized my loyalty. And a contract that would stand as proof of my worth. But what I didn't realize was that my loyalty was one-sided. While I was busy sacrificing, they were busy calculating. And when the numbers told them they could cut costs by replacing me with interns, they didn't hesitate. I thought I had a home in that company. What I really had was a seat they were already pulling out from under me. And when they finally yanked it away, they had no idea that the very contract they thought they could manage without me was already a ticking time bomb. Suspicion doesn't scream at you in the beginning. It whispers, quiet little warnings in the back of your mind. After that meeting, where they told me I was being replaced by interns, I walked out of the building with a knot in my stomach. I wasn't just insulted, I was unsettled. Because I knew something they didn't. Government contracts aren't forgiving. One mistake, one overlooked requirement, and the whole deal collapses. At first, I thought maybe they'd keep me on in some consulting role. Maybe they'd realize the interns weren't ready. But the days passed and no call came. My access to the company portal was cut off. My email shut down. My desk cleared out as if I'd never been there. Still, I stayed quiet. But curiosity tugged at me. I had poured months of my life into that $33 million contract, and I wasn't about to look the other way while kids fresh out of college stumbled through compliance forms they didn't even know existed. So I started paying attention from the outside. I still had contacts in the office, friends I'd mentored, colleagues who respected me. Over coffee or quiet phone calls, they told me what was happening. The interns had been handed responsibilities far beyond their training. They were making updates to government portals, filing compliance reports late, leaving signatures blank because they didn't think it mattered. One friend whispered, "Michael, it's a circus in here. They think you can swap 20 years of experience with free labor." I listened, nodded, and made mental notes. Then came the first real crack, a missed deadline. A quarterly report that should have been submitted by the 15th, but sat unsigned until the 22nd. That doesn't sound like much to most people, but in government work, it's a red flag. I'd built a reputation on never missing those dates. I knew the auditors would notice. I didn't call my boss. I didn't send a warning. I just sat back and thought, so it begins. Over the next few weeks, more cracks appeared. Emails forwarded to me by old colleagues showed interns asking basic questions like, "What's a FAR clause?" or "Do we need a background check for subcontractors?" Those weren't small oversights. Those were landmines waiting to go off. And the worst part? My boss brushed it all aside. He paraded the interns around like trophies, telling the board how much money he was saving. He bragged about innovation and lean staffing models, completely blind to the storm brewing under his nose. Meanwhile, I started keeping my own notes, dates, issues, mistakes. I wasn't planning revenge yet, but I could feel the scales tipping. The more they dismissed experience, the more obvious it became that this wasn't going to end quietly. Then came the moment that sealed it for me. A former colleague called me late one night. His voice was tense. "Michael, you won't believe what just happened." One of the interns submitted a security clearance form without running it through the compliance channel. They used the wrong template, wrong version. That's not just sloppy, that's a breach. I closed my eyes, leaned back in my chair, and let out a long breath. A breach. That was the word that kills government contracts faster than anything. If the wrong person noticed, it could void the entire deal. And sooner or later, the wrong person always notices. That was the night I stopped wondering if the contract would collapse. I knew it would. The only question was when. But here's the thing. I didn't warn them. Not because I wanted the company to fail, but because I understood something they didn't. They had made their choice. They had decided my 2 decades of experience were worth less than unpaid interns. They had told me, in no uncertain terms, that I wasn't needed. So I let their choices run their course. I didn't sabotage. I didn't interfere. I just watched. And every week, another thread unraveled. Reports came back riddled with errors. Subcontractors complained about late payments. Government liaisons sent curt emails about missing attachments. The interns, drowning in responsibilities they didn't understand, started quitting one by one. And still, my boss smiled in board meetings, pretending everything was under control. The irony was almost painful. I'd spent years warning management that government contracts weren't about speed or cost cutting. They were about precision. The smallest oversight could trigger an audit, and audits don't forgive. They don't care about excuses. They care about the letter of the law. And I knew, with absolute certainty, that when the auditors finally dug in, the company would be finished. Every fiber of me wanted to march back into that building, slam my notes on the table, and shout, "I told you so." But I didn't, because silence was stronger. Silence gave me distance. Silence meant when the hammer finally fell, no one could point a finger at me. I wasn't angry anymore. I was patient. And patience has a way of turning suspicion into certainty. I kept my head down, lined up opportunities elsewhere, and waited. My friends inside kept me updated, not because I asked, but because they couldn't believe what they were seeing. "Michael, they're sinking," one said. "They don't even realize it yet." And I smiled quietly, because I realized something. You don't need to destroy people who are determined to destroy themselves. You just need to step aside and let gravity do its work. The unraveling was almost complete. All it would take was one moment, one undeniable mistake, to snap the whole thing wide open. And I knew that moment was coming. Up until then, I was watching from the sidelines, collecting scraps of information, listening to whispers from old colleagues, piecing together a picture of slow-motion failure. But there was always that sliver of doubt. Maybe they'd patch the holes. Maybe the interns would stumble into doing something right. Maybe the contract would limp along despite it all. That doubt died the day I saw the compliance report. It was a Tuesday evening when a former coworker, someone still in the trenches, sent me a PDF with the subject line, "You need to see this." I opened it on my laptop, expecting another sloppy form or late submission. Instead, what stared back at me was a disaster in black and white. A quarterly compliance report. The most critical document in the entire process, filed with entire sections left blank. No security clearance updates, no subcontractor verification, missing signatures from required officers. It was practically a checklist of how to get a $33 million contract yanked out from under you. And stamped across the bottom, in bold letters, were the words, "Prepared by Intern Team." My chest went cold. I read through it 3 times, hoping I'd missed something, that maybe the draft had been sent by mistake. But it wasn't a draft. It was already logged in the government portal. Official, permanent. That was it. That was the fatal blow. I leaned back in my chair, staring at the ceiling, and for the first time since they'd fired me, I felt no anger, no sadness, just certainty. I knew in that moment the contract was finished. No auditor in their right mind would overlook errors this glaring. It wasn't just sloppy. It was negligence. The interns weren't to blame. They were kids tossed into the deep end with no life jackets. The blame fell squarely on my boss, the man who thought cutting corners and chasing cheap labor could replace 20 years of experience. And now, his gamble was about to cost him $33 million. I didn't call him. I didn't send a warning. I didn't forward the report back with notes in red ink like I had done 1,000 times before. Because I realized something. I wasn't their safety net anymore. I wasn't their cleanup crew. I wasn't their employee. I was their witness. That was the snap for me. The exact moment I shifted from feeling betrayed to feeling empowered. Because I knew, with every fiber of my being, that no matter what spin they tried to put on it, the truth was written down, filed, and time-stamped. The government doesn't ignore timestamps. I poured myself a drink that night, sat at the kitchen table, and stared at the report one last time. And then I closed the laptop. No more doubt. No more waiting to see if they'd fix their mistakes. The collapse was inevitable now. And the best part, I didn't have to do a thing. The truth was already in motion, working its way through the system like a slow fuse on dynamite. All I had to do was stand still and let it burn. I thought about my boss in that moment, the way he'd smirked in the boardroom, talking about fresh perspectives and cheaper labor. I wondered if he had any idea that his empire was already crumbling beneath him. Probably not. Arrogance blinds you like that, but I knew, and knowing was enough. That was the night I finally slept without tension in my chest, because the moment I saw that compliance report, the war was already over. They just didn't realize it yet. The night I saw that compliance report, I understood one thing with absolute clarity. The contract was doomed. It wasn't a matter of if it would collapse, but when. And when it did, I wanted to make sure two things were true. First, that I wouldn't be anywhere near the blast. And second, that no one could twist the story to pin the failure on me. That meant preparation. Quiet. Careful. Calculated. I started with documentation. I went through old emails, reports, and files I had kept from my time on the contract. Every note I'd sent to management warning about compliance risks, every checklist I'd made, every presentation I delivered that laid out the steps to safeguard the deal. I compiled it all into a binder, not unlike the one I'd built during the trust fund case, except this time it wasn't about exposing fraud. It was about proving competence. My competence. If the company tried to spin the collapse as Michael's fault, I wanted to have a wall of evidence saying otherwise. Dates, signatures, official records, proof that I'd not only done my job, but gone beyond it. Next, I protected my reputation. Government contracts are a small world. Word travels fast. I reached out to contacts I'd built over the years, quietly, casually, never bad-mouthing my old company, just making sure people knew I was available if opportunities arose. I didn't even have to explain much. The moment I mentioned I was no longer with the firm, their eyebrows went up. They knew something was wrong. One government liaison even said, "If you're not there anymore, I give that contract 6 months, tops." I smiled but kept my silence. Then I focused on aligning with the truth before it broke wide open. I had no interest in whistleblowing, no interest in revenge through sabotage. The company was already doing that to itself, but I did make sure my attorney knew what was coming, and I provided him with copies of the compliance report I'd seen, along with the timeline of my removal. He advised me exactly what to do. Stay clean. Stay quiet. Let their choices stand on their own. When the fallout comes, you'll be on solid ground. That became my mantra. Meanwhile, I kept listening. My contacts inside the company fed me details without me even asking. The interns were drowning. Some had already quit, leaving even fewer hands on the wheel. Reports were riddled with mistakes, payments delayed, subcontractors furious, and my boss. He was doubling down, holding meetings about synergy and innovation, bragging about savings while the ship was already taking on water. I wrote down everything I heard. Dates, quotes, mistakes. Not because I planned to use it against them, but because I wanted a record. A personal ledger of just how quickly arrogance can eat through an empire. At home, I kept my life steady. I tucked Lily into bed, made time for dinners with friends, and slowly rebuilt the parts of myself that the company had drained for years. But every night, before turning in, I opened that binder, reviewed my notes, and added more. Quiet preparation became part of my routine. One thing my attorney reminded me was that collapse has collateral damage. When the contract fails, Michael, they may try to drag you into it. Don't underestimate desperation. So I prepared for that too. I kept copies of my exit paperwork, the official memo that said I was removed before the interns took over. I had witness statements from colleagues confirming the same. I even backed up files on a hard drive I stored at my mother's house, just in case. The irony wasn't lost on me. I was doing the same thing I'd done for years in that company. Protecting the contract, protecting the details. Except this time, I was protecting myself from the very people I had once served. And the more I prepared, the calmer I felt. Weeks turned into months, and the cracks widened. A subcontractor called me privately, furious about late payments and missed deadlines. "Michael, I don't know what's going on over there, but it's chaos." I listened, sympathized, but never criticized. My silence kept me safe. By the 4th month, whispers of an audit started circulating. That was the moment I knew the end game was close. Government auditors don't show up without cause, and when they do, they don't come empty-handed. They bring magnifying glasses, and they find everything. I doubled down on preparation. I printed fresh copies of every warning I'd ever given my boss. I organized them chronologically, page after page, so that anyone who flipped through would see a clear story. Michael did his job. The company ignored him. The contract collapsed. One night, as I slid another page into the binder, I realized something. I wasn't angry anymore. Not even a little. My silence had transformed from strategy into freedom. They could fall however they wanted. I didn't need to push, because the truth was already pulling them down. The interns couldn't stop it. My boss couldn't spin it. And no amount of cost-cutting could save them from the reality that government contracts don't bend. They break. And this one was about to break spectacularly. The last piece of preparation was personal. I had already lined up interviews, secured a position at a smaller firm that valued my expertise. They offered less money, but more respect, more balance, a chance to rebuild without the constant weight of arrogance above me. So I accepted, quietly. That way, when the contract finally imploded, I wouldn't just be watching from the sidelines. I'd already be standing somewhere new, with solid ground under my feet. My boss thought replacing me with interns saved him money. He thought it proved I was unnecessary. What he didn't realize was that I had already built the foundation of his downfall long before he showed me the door. Not by sabotage, not by schemes, but by doing the same thing I'd always done. Preparing, documenting, building structures that couldn't be ignored. The difference this time was simple. I wasn't building it for him. I was building it for me. And when the auditors finally arrived, and they always do, the only thing left for me to do was stand back and watch. The thing about government audits is that they don't announce themselves until the very last minute. One day, everything looks normal. Meetings, memos, reports stacked in inboxes. And the next, auditors are standing in the lobby with clipboards and laptops, asking for files that no one's ready to hand over. I found out about it the way I'd found out about everything else. A call from a former colleague. His voice was tight, urgent. "Michael, they're here. The auditors. It's bad. Real bad." I didn't ask for details. I didn't have to. I knew exactly what they were going to find. From that moment, it unfolded like clockwork. The interns scrambled to pull together documents they didn't understand, patching gaps with guesses. My old boss barked orders, trying to project confidence, but the walls were already collapsing. Auditors don't care about confidence. They care about signatures, dates, compliance boxes checked in perfect order. And every missing page, every late report, every unsigned form was a nail in the coffin. Within days, word spread. The $33 million contract was under review. The government had flagged significant irregularities and was considering termination. I stayed silent. Friends still inside the company sent me updates almost daily. The auditors requested backups of quarterly reports. Half of them were incomplete. They asked for subcontractor verifications. Some were missing entirely. They demanded clearance forms, only to discover outdated versions had been submitted months late. One by one, the errors piled up. It wasn't just one mistake or two. It was dozens, strung together like a rope strong enough to hang the whole company. And through it all, my boss insisted everything was fine. He told the board he had it under control, told the interns to fix it or fake it, told anyone who asked that the contract was secure. But the truth was already written down in permanent ink, and no pep talk could erase it. When the official notice finally came, I wasn't surprised. The government terminated the contract. $33 million. Gone in an instant. Years of credibility. Wiped away. My old company wasn't just losing a deal. They were blacklisted, barred from bidding on federal work for the foreseeable future. For a firm built entirely on government contracts, it was a death sentence. The fallout was swift. Board members resigned. Investors pulled funding. The interns scattered, their resumes stained with failure that wasn't entirely theirs. And my boss, the man who replaced me to save a few salaries, he was left standing in the ruins of the empire he'd built, reputation in tatters, career effectively over. I didn't have to lift a finger. I didn't have to shout or gloat or even be in the room. My revenge wasn't a single action. It was patience. It was silence. It was letting arrogance burn itself out until there was nothing left but ashes. I'll never forget the day one of my contacts inside the company called me, voice heavy with disbelief. "Michael," he said, "it's over. The contract's gone. They're shutting down offices," I asked calmly. "What about the boss?" He paused. "He's finished. The board forced him out. He's not even allowed in the building anymore." I thanked him, hung up, and sat there in my kitchen staring out the window. I didn't smile. I didn't cheer. I just breathed. Because the satisfaction wasn't in his downfall. It was in the justice of it. He had dismissed me, erased me, told me my decades of work could be done by interns, and now the proof was undeniable. My work wasn't replaceable. It was irreplaceable. The silence in that boardroom when the auditors laid out their findings, I wasn't there, but I could imagine it. And that silence was worth more than any paycheck they ever gave me. For weeks afterward, people reached out, colleagues, government contacts, even competitors. They all wanted to know the story. And I told it the same way every time, calmly, factually, without bitterness. Because the facts were damning enough. They replaced me with interns. They ignored the warnings. They cut corners. And it cost them $33 million. That was all that needed to be said. In the end, revenge wasn't about screaming or throwing accusations or burning bridges. It was about standing still long enough for the truth to collapse the lies all on its own. And collapse it did. When the dust settled, the company I'd given 2 decades of my life to was nothing but a shell. The $33 million contract was gone, their reputation blacklisted, their board gutted, and their offices half empty. What they had once celebrated as their biggest win had become the nail in their coffin. And me, I was free. For the first time in years, I woke up without that knot in my stomach. No deadlines to clean up. No boss hovering with half-baked ideas. No interns pushed into roles they weren't ready for. Just silence. Just peace. I won't lie. Part of me grieved. Not for my boss, not for the company, but for the time I had given. The birthdays I missed. The weekends I traded. The nights I sat in a fluorescent-lit office while my family ate dinner without me. You can't get those back. And when I realized how quickly they had thrown me aside, it hurt to admit how one-sided that loyalty had been. But grief has a way of teaching you. And the lesson was clear. Loyalty without respect is slavery. I thought about my father's words. If your name's on it, it should mean something. He was right. My name had meant something. It meant quality, precision, stability. That's why the contract had been won in the first place. The tragedy was that my boss never understood the value of a name. To him, names were replaceable. People were replaceable. Experience was replaceable. Until the government proved otherwise. In the months after the collapse, I rebuilt. I accepted a position at a smaller firm, one that valued expertise over flash. The salary was leaner, but the respect was richer. My new team didn't see me as a cost to be cut. They saw me as a mentor, a guide, someone whose 2 decades of scars and stories could save them from making the same mistakes. And for the first time, I found balance. I made it to Lily's school play. I grilled steaks in the backyard on a Sunday instead of reviewing compliance checklists. I started living again, not just working. Looking back now, I don't see the $33 million contract as something I lost. I see it as something they lost, something they chose to gamble and squander. My revenge wasn't the collapse itself. My revenge was surviving it intact, with my dignity, my reputation, and my peace restored. The boss who smirked while replacing me with interns will forever be remembered as the man who cost his company $33 million. That's his legacy. Mine is different. Mine is the knowledge that even when betrayed, even when discarded, I stayed true to my standards. I let the truth speak for me. That's the final lesson I carry. When someone underestimates you, you don't have to prove them wrong in the moment. Sometimes the best response is silence. Because silence gives lies enough room to collapse under their own weight. They thought I was replaceable. The government proved I wasn't. And when the smoke cleared, I didn't just have revenge. I had freedom. If this story hit home, don't forget to hit that like button. It means more than you know. Share it with someone who's ever been underestimated, and subscribe for more true stories of justice and resilience. Every week, I bring you real human battles and how they were won. Stay strong, stay hopeful, and I'll see you in the next story.